Hi, I'm going to be reading to you today from Chapter 2 of Alas Babylon. Randy left the house in time to see Missouri wedge herself under the wheel of the Henry's Model A Ford, an antique, so certified with a Q tag issued by the state, but kept in perfect running condition order by Malachi's mechanical ingenuity. "I haven't finished, but I got to go now," she said. "Mrs. McGovern, she holds the clock on me, and I'll be back tomorrow." The Model A, listing to port with Missouri's weight, bounced down the pebble driveway. Randy got into his new Bonneville. It was a sweet car, a compromise between a sports job and a hard top. Long, low, very fast, and a lot of fun, even though its high compression engine drank premium fuel in quantity. Before I go on, I just want you guys to pay attention to the setup that the book has in terms of mentioning things that are older or more antiquated versus and making these comparisons to things that are newer. Okay, we obviously always think, oh, newer is better, but in this case in the book you may see that the older versions of things prove to be more useful. At 11, approaching Orlando on Route 50, he turned on the radio for the news. Turkey had appealed to the UN for an investigation of border penetrations by Syria. Syria charged Israel with planning a preventative war. Israel accused Egypt of sending snooper planes over its defenses. Egypt claimed its ships, bound from the Black Sea to Alexandria, were being delayed in the Straits, and charged Turkey with a breach of the Montreux Convention. Russia accused Turkey and the United States of plotting to crush Syria, and warned France, Italy, Greece, and Spain that any nations harboring American bases would be involved in a general war and erased from the earth. So, I've just listed a lot of countries thus far. And the reason for this is how many different countries and different moving parts there are going on right now in terms of this crisis in the novel. Okay? And you will see that it comes to into play later on. The Secretary of State was somewhere over the Atlantic, bound for conferences in London. The Soviet ambassador to Washington had been recalled for consultation. There were riots in France. It all sounded bad, but familiar, as an old scratchy record. He had heard it all before in almost the same words back in 57 and 58. So why push the panic button? Mark could be wrong. He couldn't know for certain that the balloon was going up unless he knew something fresh, something that had not appeared in the newspapers or had been broadcast. Shortly before noon, Florence Wiechek hung her back at one sign on the office door and walked down Yulee Street to meet Alice Cooksey at the Pink Flamingo. Fridays, they always lunched together. Alice, tiny, drab, in black and gray, an active, angry sparrow of a woman, arrived late. She hurried to Florence's table and said, "I'm sorry, I've just had a squabble with Kitty Offenhouse." "Oh dear," Florence said, "again?" Kitty was secretary of the PTA, past president of the Frangipani Circle, treasurer of the Women's Club, and a member of the library board. Also, she was the wife of Luther Bubba Offenhouse, chief tail twister of the Lions Club, vice president of the Chamber of Commerce, and deputy director of civil defense for the whole county. He owned the most prosperous business in town, the Offenhouse Mortuary, and a twin real estate development, Repose in Peace Park. I'd like to point out, by listing all of these offices that both Kitty and her husband hold, the book is trying to point out to us that they are a big deal in Fort Repose. Alice lifted the menu. It fluttered. She set it down quickly and said, "Yes, again. I guess I'll have the tuna fish salad." "You should eat more, Alice," Florence said, noticing how white and pinched her friend's face looked. "What happened?" Kitty came in and said she heard rumors that we had books by Carl Rowan and Walter White, and I told her the rumors were true and did she want to borrow one. What did she say? Florence put down her fork, no longer interested in her chicken patty. Said that they were subversive and anti-South. She's a daughter of the Confederacy and ordered me to take them off the shelves, and I told her that as long as I was librarian, they would stay there. She said she was going to bring it before the board and, if necessary, take it up with Porky Logan. He's on the investigating committee in Tallahassee. Alice, you're going to lose your job. Kitty Offenhouse was the most influential person in Fort Repose with the exception of Edgar Quisenberry, who owned and ran the bank. I don't think so. I told her that if anything like that happens, I'd call the St. Petersburg Times and Tampa Tribune and Miami Herald, and they would send reporters and photographers. And I said, Kitty, can't you see the picture on the front page and the headline? Undertaker's wife cremates books? This was the most fascinating news Florence had heard in weeks. What happened then? Nothing at all. If I may borrow an expression from one of my younger readers, she left in an 8-cylinder huff. You really wouldn't call it papers, would you? Alice spoke carefully, understanding fully that everything would soon be repeated. I certainly would, but I don't think I'll have to. You see, publicity would hurt Bubba's businesses. 1/3 of Bubba's customers are Negroes and another third Yankees who came down here to live on their pensions and stayed to die. She lifted her bright, fiercely blue eyes and added, if repeating one of the commandments, censorship and thought control can only exist in secrecy and darkness. And that was all? That was all, Alice said, tried her salad. What have you been doing, Florence? So we've just been introduced to another Fort Repose resident, Alice Cooksey, the town librarian. Okay, and as you can see from this interaction with Florence, she isn't afraid of anybody and will stand up for what she believes in. Florence could think of no adventure or even any news culled from the wire that can compete with telling off Kitty Offenhouse, except her experience with Randy Bragg. She pledged herself not to say anything about Randy to anyone, but she could trust Alice, who was worldly wise in spite of her appearance, and who might even, when younger, have encountered a peeping Tom herself. So Florence told about Randy and his binoculars and how he had stared at her that morning. It's almost unbelievable, she concluded. It is unbelievable, Alice said flatly. But I saw him at it. I don't care. I know the Bragg boys. So Florence is obviously trying to create a little excitement and add to their little gossip conversation by telling Alice that she thinks that Randy is a peeping Tom. However, Alice is having none of it because she's basically telling Florence, I don't believe that Randy is a peeping Tom. I don't believe you. And I know these boys really well, and I know the family well, and for you to kind of say these things about Randy isn't right. Even before you came here, Florence, I knew them. I knew Judge Bragg well, very well. Florence remembered vague reports many years back of Alex Cooksey having gone with Judge Bragg. Gone means dated. Before the judge married Gertrude. But that made no difference to what went on in the Bragg house now. You'll have to admit that those Bragg boys are a little peculiar, Florence said. You should have seen the cable Randy got from Mark this morning. Urgent, they meet at McCoy today. Helen and the children flying to Orlando tonight. You know those children can't be out of school yet. And the last two words didn't make any sense at all. Alas, Babylon, isn't that crazy? Those boys aren't crazy, Alice said. They've always been bright boys. Full of hell, yes, but at least they could read, which is more than I can say for children nowadays. Do you know that Randy read every history in the library before he was 16? I don't think that has anything to do with his sex habits, Florence said. She leaned across the table and touched Alice's arm. Alice, come out to my house tonight for the weekend. I want you to see for yourself. I can't. I keep the library open Saturdays. That's my only chance to get the young ones. Evenings and Sundays, they're paralyzed by TV. I'm open Saturday mornings too. We can drive in together. I'll pick you up when we're through tomorrow evening. It'll be a change for you out in the country, away from that stuffy room. Alice hesitated. It would be nice to visit with Florence, but she hated to accept favors that she couldn't repay. She said, well, we'll see. So, Florence may have thought that she was gossiping with Alice about Randy peeping at her through the binoculars. But one juicy tidbit that she really let slip was the fact that Mark had sent Randy an urgent cable finishing with Alas Babylon. And as we all know by this point in time, Alas Babylon is their secret family code for something that's amiss or something's wrong or something bad is about to happen. Okay? You're going to see Alice is a smart lady and she's going to go back to the library and figure this all out. When Alice returned to the library, 3 old-timers, too old for shuffleboard or the lawn bowlers club, were bent over the periodical table. Like mummies, she thought, partially unwrapped. One of the mummies leaned slowly over until his nose fell into the folds of Cosmopolitan. Alice walked over to the table and made certain that he still breathed. She let him nap on and smiled at the other 2 and darted into the reference room with its towering top-heavy stacks. From the first stack, religious and spiritual works in steady demand. Obviously, here, the author of the book is trying to include a little satire. Nobody is interested in these religious and spiritual works. So when you read the line from the first stack, religious and spiritual works in steady demand, that's satire. Okay. She brought down the King James Bible. She believed she would find the words in Revelation, and she did. She read 2 verses, lips moving, words murmuring in her throat. And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning. Standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city of Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. So, Alice has figured out that something really bad is about to happen. Alice put the Bible back on its shelf and walked, head down, to her cracked oak desk, like a schoolmarm's desk on a dais in the main hallway. She sat there staring at the green blotter, at the antiquated pen and the glass inkwell, at the wooden file filled with readers' cards, the stack of publishers' spring lists. Alone of all the people in Fort Repose, Alice Cooksey knew Mark Bragg well enough and had absorbed sufficient knowledge of the world's illness through the printed word to understand that the books she had ordered from those spring lists might never be delivered. She had small fear of death, and of man none at all, but the formlessness of what was about to come overwhelmed her. She always associated Babylon with New York, and she wished right now that she lived on Manhattan, where one could die in a bright millisecond without suffering, without risking the indignity of panic. She picked up the telephone and called Florence. She would come out for the weekend, or even longer, if Florence was agreeable. When she sat the phone down, Alice felt steadier. If it came soon, she would have a friendly hand to hold, and she would not be alone. This next part shifts to Randy meeting Mark at the military base. And you're going to hear Randy comment that the base seems different and it's more deserted and there are less civilians. And this is definitely a big clue of bad things that are about to come, because if they're evacuating civilians from the base and the general area, they're doing that as a protective measure. The air police sergeant at McCoy's main gate questioned Randy and then allowed him to call Lieutenant Colonel Paul Hart, a squadron commander and friend of Mark's. Hart had been to Fort Repose to fish for bass, first as Mark's guest, and later on several occasions as a guest of Randy. So he was something more than an acquaintance. Randy said he had had a wire from Mark to meet him at noon, and Hart said, "He whistled through here yesterday, didn't expect him back so soon. Anyway, drive to base ops. We'll go out on the line and meet him together. Let me talk to the air police and I'll clear you through." This is where Randy starts to notice these changes. Driving through the base, Randy sensed a change since his last visit the year before. Physically, McCoy looked the same. It felt different. The air police questioning had been sharper and more serious. That wasn't the difference. He realized something else was missing. And then he had it. Where were all the people? McCoy seemed almost deserted, with less activity and fewer men and fewer cars than a year ago. And he saw no civilians. He saw no women, not even around the clubs and the BX. The most congested area on the base was the steps and lawn in front of the alert barracks, opposite wing headquarters, where standby crewmen, rigid and stiff in pressure suits, talked and smoked. Trucks, tailgates down, were back to the curb. Drivers slouched over their wheels as if they had been there a long time. He drove on to base operations and parked close to the flight line fence. Last year, he had seen B-47s, tankers, and fat transports stretching their wings tip to tip the length of the line, miles. Now their numbers had dwindled. He counted fewer than 20 B-47s and guessed that the wing was in Africa or Spain or England on 90-day foreign duty. But this could not be so, because Paul Hart, winner of bombing and navigation trophies, a select crew aircraft commander, would have led the flight. I want to point out something. As we get further into this book, you'll be reading or you'll be listening, and you'll hear a lot of this military jargon. Okay? One of the reasons why it is written this way and the author chose to do this is because just as we are regular everyday people with little to no military knowledge, reading this book, he's trying to present it from a civilian's point of view in terms of all of this military jargon we don't understand, okay? And the book purposely, or the author purposely chooses to do this. And it's to simulate how the average person in this novel, like Florence, okay, or others that you will meet, might feel the same way. Like they just don't understand really what's going on. Hart, a stocky, bandy-legged man with punched-in nose, a fighter's chin, and an easy grin, met him at the door of operations. "Hey, Randy," he said, "just checked the board. Mark will touch down in 8 minutes. How's the fishing?" "It's been lousy." He looked up at the windsock. "But it'll get better if this high sticks around and the wind holds from the east." "What's he flying?" "Oh, he's not flying anything. He's riding soft and plush in a C-135. That's the transport version of our new jet tanker, with a lot of Offutt brass. Other brass, that is. I hear he gets his star soon. Only promotion I'll ever get is to a B-58. Penalty for being a hot pilot," Randy said. "What's going on around here? It looks like a ghost shop. You guys, it looks like a ghost town. You guys shutting up shop? You haven't heard about SAC's interim dispersals?" "Vaguely, yes, on some of the commentaries." "Well, we're not shouting about it, but we try to keep half of the wing off this base, because where we're standing right now is a primary target. We farm out our fighter planes to fields and Navy fields and even commercial airports, and we try to keep 10% of the wing airborne at all times. If you look down there in front of the jumbo hangar, you'll see 4 standby 47s bombed up and ready to go. It's a damn expensive way to run an Air Force." Randy looked. They were there. Wings drooping with full tanks, bound to earth by slender umbilical cords, the starter cables. "I didn't really mean the planes so much as the people," Randy said. "Where is everybody?" Oh, that. Hart frowned as if deciding how much could be said and what words to use. The papers know about it, but they aren't printing it, he said finally. And the people around Orlando must know about it by now, so it can't be any great secret. We've been on a sort of modified alert for 4 or 5 weeks. Maybe I should call it a creeping evacuation. We've cleared the area of all civilian and non-essential personnel, and we're encouraging everybody to move their families out of the blast zone. You see, Randy, we can't expect 3 to 6 hours warning anymore. If we're lucky, we might get 15 minutes. Randy nodded. He noticed long red missiles slung under the wings of the standby B-47s. He recognized them from the newspaper photographs as the Rascal, an air-to-ground H-bomb carrier. Is that red baby much help? He asked. That red baby, Hart said, is what we call the crew saver. The Ruskies are no dopes. They'll try to stop us with missiles, air-to-air and ground-to-air, beam riders, heat seekers, sound finders, and for all I know, smellers. It'll be no milk run, but with the Rascal and some other gadgets, we don't have to write ourselves off as a kamikaze corps. We won't have to penetrate their inner defense zones, and we can lay off target and let that red baby fly. It knows where to go. Do you know what? What? Paul Hart's smile had vanished, and he looked older, and when he spoke, it was gravely. When the whistle blows, I'll have a better chance if I'm in my aircraft headed for target than I am sitting at home with my feet propped up, drinking a scotch and Martha rubbing the kinks out of my neck. And our little place on the lake is 5 miles from here, so I'm a man of peace. I wish Martha and the kids lived in Fort Repose. Randy heard the low whine of jets at fractional power and saw a cigar-shaped C-135 line up with the runway in its swoop downward. Presently, it wheeled into a taxi strip and braked in front of operations. A flag, 3 white stars on a blue field, popped out of the cockpit, indicating that a lieutenant general was aboard and alerting McCoy to provide the courtesies due such rank. The 3-star general was first down the ramp, his pink-cheeked aide scurrying about his heels like an anxious puppy. Mark was last off. Randy waved and caught his eye, and Mark waved back but did not smile. Coming down the ramp and across the concrete, knees bare in tropical uniform, Mark looked like a slightly larger edition of Randy, an inch taller and a shade broader, and at 30 feet they looked like twins, with the same jet hair, white teeth behind mobile lips, quizzical eyes set deep, the same rakish walk and swing of shoulders, cleft in chin and emphatic nose with a bony bump on the bridge. At 3 feet, deep lines showed around Mark's eyes and mouth, and gray appeared in his black thicket. His jaw thrust out an extra half inch. His face was leaner. At 3 feet, they were entirely different, and it was apparent Mark was the older, harder, and probably wiser man. Mark put one hand on Hart's shoulder and the other on Randy's and walked them toward the building. "Paul," he told Hart, "you better get with General Haycock. He's hungry, and when he gets hungry, he gets fierce. How about helping his aide dig up some transport and get him over to the O Club? We're only here to gas up. Takeoff is in 50 minutes. Hart looked up and saw 3 blue Air Force sedans swing up the driveway. "There's the General's transport right there," he said, and then, realizing that Mark had tactfully implied that he wanted to be alone with his brother, added, "But I'll go along to the O Club and get the mess officer on the ball." He shook hands and said, "See you, Mark, next time around." "Sure," Mark said. He turned to Randy. "Where's your car? I've got a lot to say and not a lot of time to say it. We can talk in the car, but first let's get some candy or something inside Ops. We didn't load any lunches at Ramey." The front seat of the Bonneville was like a sunny, comfortable private office. Randy asked the essential question first. What time did Helen and the children get in? Mark brought a notebook out of his hip pocket. 3:30 tomorrow morning, local time at Orlando Municipal. Carmody, he's wing commander at Ramey, has a friend in the eastern office in San Juan. He ramrodded it through for me. The plane leaves Omaha at 7:10 tonight, and one change in Chicago. Isn't that a little rough on Helen and the kids? They can sleep all the way from Chicago to Orlando. It'll be just as tough on you meeting them. The important thing is I got the reservation. This time of year it took some doing. Okay. Because we live in a world where we can just click on an app and order up a airline reservation or get online and figure out flights, this may not seem like a big deal, but a long time ago, you literally had to call airlines, wait on hold, see if there was flight availability, or you had to go to a travel agent, and they didn't operate as many flights. So it is important to take note of the fact that Mark realized that this was a dire situation, and he did whatever he could to get a reservation for his wife and children to come stay in Fort Repose with Randy. Again, this is an example of our modern technology that we have become so accustomed to versus the technology that was available during this time period in which the book is set in. What's the great rush? Randy demanded. What the hell's going on? Contain yourself, son, Mark said. I'm going to give you a complete briefing. Have you told Helen yet? I sent her a cable from San Juan. Just told her I'd made reservations for tonight. She'll understand. He squinted at the gaudy dials and gleaming knobs on the dashboard. Some buggy you've got here, Randy. Won't be worth a damn to you. About Helen. She and I thrashed all this out long ago. She won't like it. Not at all will she like it. But now the time has come. But I'll have her on that plane if I have to truss her up and send her air freight. Randy said nothing. He simply tapped the car clock. A reminder. Okay, said Mark. I'll brief you. First strategic, then tactical. He pushed a peanut butter cracker into his mouth, found his pen, and began to sketch in his notebook. He drew a rough map of the Mediterranean. Mark doesn't cerebrate until he has a pen in his hand, Randy thought, and can see a map. Probably makes him feel comfortable, like he's holding a pointer in the SAC war room. The key is the Med, Mark said. For 300 years, the Russians have tried to pry open the straits and debouch into the Mediterranean. Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, Tsar Alexander, they all tried it. Now, more than ever, control of the Med means control of the world. Randy nodded. Conquerors knew or sensed this. Caesar had done it. Xerxes, Napoleon, and Hitler failed. Xerxes had won at Salamis. We'd all be speaking Persian, but that was a long time, pre-Sputnik and pre-ICBM. I thought the fight now was for control of space. Who controls space controls the world. Mark smiled. It can also happen just the other way around. We, by we I mean the NATO coalition, aren't going to be allowed time to catch up with them in operational ICs, much less control space. Don't argue with me. We have their war plan. Randy took a deep breath and sat up straight. For the first time, Russia has bridgeheads in the Mediterranean. Here, here, and here. Mark drew ovals on the map. They'll have a fleet in the Med as powerful as ours when you match their submarine strength against our carriers. They have Turkey ringed on 3 sides, and if they could upset the Turkish government and force capitulation of the Bosporus and Dardanelles, they would have won the war without fighting. The Med would be theirs, Africa cut off from Europe, NATO outflanked from the south, and one by one all our allies, except England, would fall into their laps or declare themselves neutral. SAC's bases in Africa and Spain would be untenable and melt away. NATO would fold up, and the IR sites we're planning never finished. They took a look at the board and resigned the game. Then, in '58, after the Iraq king was assassinated, we grabbed the initiative and landed Marines in Lebanon. We got there fastest. They saw that we were ready and could not be surprised. They were caught off balance and didn't dare move. This time it's different. They're ready to go through with it because the odds have changed. How can you know this? Remember reading about the Russian general who came over in Berlin? An air general, a shrewd character, a human being? He brought us their war plan in his head. This time, they're not resigning the game. They'd still like to win the war without a war, but if we make any military countermove, we're going to receive it. For a moment, they were both silent. On the other side of the flight line fence, 3 ground crewmen were throwing a baseball. 2 were pitching to an older sergeant, built like Yogi Berra, catching. The plate was a yellow parachute pack. The ball whirred and plopped sharply into mitt. That tall boy has a lot of stuff, Randy said. Again, he felt he moved in the miasma of a dream. Something was wrong. Either Mark shouldn't be talking like this, or those airmen shouldn't be throwing a baseball out there in the warm sunlight. When he lit a cigarette, his fingers were trembling. Have a bad night, Randy? Not particularly. I'm having a bad day. I'm afraid it's going to get worse. Here's the tactical part. They know that the only way that they can do it is to knock off our nuclear capabilities with one blow, or at least cripple us so badly that they can accept what retaliatory power we have left. They don't mind losing 10 or 20 million people so long as they sweep the board, because people per se are only pawns and expendable. Again, he's talking in terms of chess. The pawns are the smaller pieces at the front line of each side of the chessboard, and those are the pieces that are usually taken out first by the opponent. And they're expendable. So their plan, it was no surprise to us, calls for a TOT on a worldwide scale. You get it. Sure, time on target. You don't fire everything in the same instant. You shoot it so it all arrives at the target on the same instant. Okay, this is a really important concept, all right? Now, to put it in like some terms that you might be able to understand, if everyone were to try and throw a piece of paper into a waste paper basket, okay, the closest person is going to get the paper into the waste paper basket first, whereas somebody who's further away, their piece of crumpled up paper will likely arrive after the person who's closest, okay? So what they're trying to do is, for example, the person who's furthest away will start first, and then maybe the person who is closest to the waste paper basket will count to 1 and then launch their paper into the basket. The idea is then for everything to all arrive at the same time, and that is the war plan that Mark is talking about that Russia has. They are going to launch missiles or launch their attack at intermittent times, at different times, so that all of these missiles and these bombs and everything else hits its targets all at the same time, so that there is no ability for its enemy, which right now is the United States and all of its allies, so that the enemies have no time to react to the attacks. Mark glanced at his watch and then looked up at the big jet transport, still loading fuel through 4 hoses from the underground tanks. That's right. It won't be 0 hour. It'll be 0 minute. They'll use no planes in the first wave, only missiles. They plan to kill every base and missile site in Europe and Africa and the UK with their T2 and T3 IRs. They plan to kill every base on this continent and in the Pacific with their ICs, plus missiles launched from the subs. Then they use SUSAC, that's what we call their strategic air force, to mop up. Can they get away with it? 3 years ago they couldn't. 3 years hence, when we have our own ICBM batteries in place, a big fleet of missile-toting subs and Nike Zeus and other stuff perfected, they couldn't. Right now we're in what we call the gap. Theoretically, they figure they can do it. I'm pretty sure they can't. But we may have some surprises for them. But that's not the point. The point is, if they think that they can get away with it, then we have lost. I don't understand. LeMay says that the only way a general can win a modern war is to not fight one. Our whole raison d'etre was deterrent force. When you don't deter them any longer, you lose. I think we lost some time ago because the last 5 Sputniks have been reconnaissance satellites. They've been mapping us with infrared and transistor television, measuring us for the Sunday punch. Randy felt angry. He felt cheated. Why hasn't everybody been told about this? Mark shrugged. You know how it is. Everything that comes in is stamped secret or top secret or cosmic or something, and that only people who dare declassify anything are the big wheels right at the top, and the people at the top hold conferences and somebody says, well, now let's not get hasty, let's not alarm the public, so everything stays secret or cosmic. Personally, I think everyone ought to be digging or evacuating right this minute. Maybe if the other side knew we were digging, they knew what we knew, they wouldn't try to get away with it. You really think it's that close? Randy asked. Why? 2 reasons. First, when I left Puerto Rico this morning, Navy was trying to track 3 skunks. Those are unidentified submarines in the Caribbean and 1 in the Gulf. 4 subs doesn't sound like enough force to cause a big flap, Randy said. 4 subs is a lot of subs when there shouldn't be any, Mark said. It's like shaking a haystack and having 4 needles pop out at your feet. Chances are that haystack is stiff with needles. He rubbed his hand across his eyes as if the glare hurt. When he spoke again, his voice was strained. They've got so blasted many. CIA thinks 600. Navy guesses maybe 750. And they don't need launchers anymore. Just dump the bird or pop it out while still submerged. The ocean itself is a perfectly good launching pad. Randy said, and the other reason? Because I'm on my way back to Offutt. We flew down yesterday on a pretty important job, figure out a way to disperse the wing on Ramey. There aren't enough fields in Puerto Rico, and anyway, the island is rugged and not big enough. We just started our staff study when we got a Zippo. That's an operational priority message to come home. And 2/3 of the Ramey wing was scrambled with flyaway kits for another place. I made my decision right then and there. I just had enough time to arrange Helen's reservation and send the cables. Mark spoke more of the Russian general with whom he had talked at length and whom apparently he liked. He isn't a traitor either to his country or to civilization. He came over in desperation, hoping that somehow we could stop those war-crazed power bastards at the top. He doesn't think their war plan will work any more than I do. Too much chance for human or mechanical error. Mark used phrases like maximum capability and calculated risk and decentralization of industry and control announced as an economic measure, but actually military. Randy listened, fascinated, until he saw 3 blue sedans turn a corner near wing headquarters. Here comes your party, he said. Anything else I ought to know? Mark brushed cracker crumbs and slivers of chocolate from his shirt. Yes. Also, there's something I have to give to you. He found a green slip of paper in his wallet and handed it to Randy. Made out to you, he said. Randy unfolded the check. It was for $5,000. What am I supposed to do with this, he asked. Cash it. Today, if you can. Don't deposit it. Cash it. It's a reserve for Helen and Franklin and Peyton. Buy stuff with it. I don't know what to tell you to buy. You'll think of it. You'll think of what you'll need as you go along. I did start a list this morning. Mark seemed pleased. That's fine. Shows you're looking ahead. I don't know whether money will help Helen or not, but cash in hand in Fort Repose will be better than an account in an Omaha bank. So $5,000, even in today's standards, is still a large amount of money, but way back then, in the late 50s, early 60s, $5,000 was a significant amount of cash. And Mark is basically telling Randy that he feels that having cash in hand is going to be really, really important when whatever happens, happens. And because we live in Miami, you can even maybe notice this when we're preparing for a hurricane. A lot of times people will withdraw cash. Why? Because if power is out and you still need to be able to go to a grocery store or go purchase something, you can't run a credit card. Why? Because there is no power. So you have to use cash to buy everything. So in this case, the circumstances are similar. Randy has this $5,000 check from Mark, and Mark is saying that cash is going to be worth more than anything else at this point in time. Randy kept on looking at the check, feeling uncomfortable. But suppose nothing happens. Suppose... Spend some of it on a good case of liquor, Mark said. Then, if nothing happens, we'll have a wonderful, expensive toot together, and you can laugh at me and I won't care. Randy slipped the check into his pocket. Can I tip off anybody else? There are a few people. You've got a girl? I don't know whether she's my girl or not. I've been trying to find out. You don't know her. New people from Cleveland. Her family built on River Road. Mark hesitated. I don't see any objection. It is something civil defense should have done weeks, months ago. Use your own judgment, but be discreet. By the way, this line, it's something that civil defense should have done weeks ago or months ago, is really important, so just remember this. It will all come back later. Randy noticed that the jet transport's wings were clear of hoses. He saw the 3 blue sedans pull up at operations. He saw Lieutenant General Haycock get out of the first car. He felt Mark's hand on his shoulder and braced himself for the words he knew must come. Mark spoke very quietly. You'll take care of Helen. Certainly. I won't say be a good father to the children. They love you and they think you're swell. And you couldn't be anything but a good father to them. But I'll say this. Please be kind to Helen. Mark was having trouble with his voice. Randy tried to help him out. She's a wonderful, beautiful gal, and you have nothing to worry. Anyway, don't sound so final. You're not dead yet. She's more, Mark said. She's my right arm. We've been married 14 years, and about half that time, I've been up in the air or out in the country, or out of the country, and I've never once worried about Helen. This should help answer a study guide question, okay? When Mark makes the comparison that Helen is his right arm, he's basically saying, without her, what use would I be? She's like a part of me. He's trying to make that comparison as to how valuable she is to him. And she never had to worry about me. In 14 years, I never slept with another woman. I never kissed another woman. Not really, not even when I had duty in Tokyo or Manila or Hong Kong, and she was half a world away. She was all the woman I ever needed. She was like this. Back when I was a captain and we were moving from rented apartment to rented apartment every year or so, I got a terrific offer from Boeing. She knew what I wanted, and I didn't have to tell her. She said, I want you to stay in SAC. I think you should. I think you ought to be a general, and you're going to be a general. There's an old saying that anyone can make colonel on his own, but it takes a wife to make a general. I guess there wasn't enough time, but had there been time, she would have had her star. Randy saw Lieutenant General Haycock walk from the operations building toward the plane. It's time, Mark, he said. They got out of the car and walked quickly toward the gate. Mark swung an arm around Randy's shoulders. What I mean is, she has tremendous energy and courage, and if you let her, she'll give you that same kind of loyalty that she gave to me. Let her, Randy. She's all woman, and that's what she's made for. Stop worrying, Randy said. He didn't quite understand, and he didn't know what else to say. Haycock's aide fidgeted at the end of the ramp. Everybody's in, Colonel, he said, and the general was looking for you at lunch. The general wondered what happened to you. He was most anxious. I'll see the general as soon as we're airborne, Mark said sharply. The aide retreated 2 steps up the ramp and then waited stubbornly. They shook hands, and Mark said, "Better try and catch a nap this evening." "I will. When I get home, shall I call Helen and tell her you're on the way?" "No, not much use. The aircraft cruises at 5:50. By the time you get back to Fort Repose, we'll be west of the Mississippi." He glanced down at his bare knees. "Looks like I'll have to change into a real uniform on the aircraft. I'd look awfully funny in Omaha." "So long, Mark." Without raising his head, Mark said, "Goodbye, Randy," turned away, and climbed the ramp. Randy walked away from the transport and got into his car and drove slowly through the base. At the main gate, he surrendered his visitor's pass. He turned into a lonely lane outside the base, near the village of Pine Castle, and stopped the car in a spot shielded by cabbage palms. When he was sure no one watched and no car approached from either direction, he leaned his head forward on the wheel. He swallowed a sob and closed his eyes to forbid the tears. He heard wind rustle the palms and the chirp of cardinals in the brush. He became aware that the clock on the dash, blurred, was staring at him. The clock said he had just time to make it to the bank before closing, if he pushed hard and had luck getting through Orlando traffic. He started the engine and backed out of the lane onto the highway, and he let the car run. He knew he would not have spared time for tears. He knew he should not have spared time for tears, and would not ever again. And that is the conclusion of chapter 2.